Okay. Alright, so it's been like a year. Is it finally okay for me to say this? I like Lords of the Fallen.
Oh, come on. Pass off.
In 2023, we saw the release of two high-profile Souls-like games that many people were talking about for very different reasons. One of them was Lies of P, which received praise all around from both players and critics alike. And for good reason, Lies of P might be one of, if not the best non-FromSoftware Souls-like game released yet. But the other game, Lords of the Fallen, didn't quite receive the same amount of positivity from the fans when it launched back in October of last year. Especially on YouTube, man, people hated this game. And that is for some really good reasons. I'm not here to try and disprove everything that people say is bad about this game. I am not here to tell you that Lords of the Fallen is actually the best Souls-like ever made and it's just a misunderstood masterpiece or anything like that. But rather, I want to show you a side of the game which hasn't really been talked about all that much and how it ended up being a very enjoyable experience for me. Like everyone else said, the game does have major issues, which I agree with, and you will most likely have heard about all of them at this point, so I won't spend too much time talking about them. But instead, I am going to tell you about why I did end up liking Lords of the Fallen, and also teach you the ways of having fun with this game. But before I tell you more about my little secret here, we first have to take a look at the post-launch support for Lords of the Fallen. Because if the game would have launched in the state that it is in now, I truly believe that people wouldn't have had such a bad time with it. Shortly after Lords of the Fallen's initial release, Hexworks came out with a roadmap of post-launch updates, which would be delivered over the following weeks and months. This roadmap included a list of continuous improvements to the game with things like multiplayer stability, performance enhancements, various quality of life tweaks, and a few other things, which would be delivered on a fairly regular basis. This was pretty much to be expected given the game's rough state at launch, but they also committed to improving the player experience past these general updates. This roadmap also included new armor sets, spells, quest lines, and special boss weapon abilities. They didn't just stop there, however. We also got some major changes like enemy mob density reductions and combat tweaks, which were a huge problem on launch and majorly contributed to the negative reception. At the time of writing this, all of the things promised on this roadmap have been delivered, and we haven't heard of any new major content updates since version 1.5, where they added a new game modifier system which can shake up a new playthrough in some pretty cool and interesting ways. Actually, scratch that, just a couple of weeks after that they also implemented a way to replay all of the fights against major bosses in this game. Alright, quick editor's note here. I'm currently sitting here on the 12th of December and they just put out another update. This video has been in the works for so goddamn long that they've been putting out so many updates in this time. It is insane. You can really tell that they do actually care about this product. What just came out now, I'm looking at it, it's 1.7 and there have been so many small updates in between as well. I'm putting them on screen somewhere. It is insane. There are people coming back to the game now because they've heard tell that, you know, there's been a bunch of updates. And I've just been taking so long to get this video out that I had this video idea at like the start of the year. They do care about this game. They're still updating it. Continue. I'm really happy that they decided on sticking with Lords of the Fallen because I, for one, was really enjoying it. But this leaves one last question in regards to the post-launch updates. Did they actually address the criticism that people had and made the game better as a result? Yes. But I'm not gonna pretend like they've just magically fixed everything. Performance, enemy density, and encounter problems, network stability issues, combat feel, and quality of life features have been improved pretty significantly. But some other issues still persist, as they are just so deeply woven into the core of the game that they couldn't possibly have fixed everything with some updates. But there's also no denying that the game is in a much, much better state than before in pretty much every aspect.
Das geht.
Now, let's finally get to the main reason as to why I was able to enjoy my time with the game so much more than seemingly everyone else who decided to make videos on this wretched software. It's common knowledge that playing a game with a friend will make your experience 10 times better by default, because you're just out there having fun with your friend, even if the game is not all that great. But in Lords of the Fallen, it goes a step further, in my opinion. When playing through the game in co-op, many of the issues I would have otherwise had got alleviated by the fact that there was a second player in the world. I'm not going to go so far as to say that the game was specifically developed for co-op, but it might have unintentionally been because of some of their design choices. In the game's marketing, they mentioned the inclusion of seamless co-op, and if you are a casual Souls game enjoyer, that statement should make you pretty excited, because most Souls game co-op is anything but seamless, with the exception of one absolutely fantastic mod which everyone who's into playing with their friends already knows about. So how well has the seamless co-op concept been adapted into Lords of the Fallen, you may ask? Pretty damn good. But it also didn't quite stick the landing. First, you make your way to one of the game's vestiges, which act as checkpoints. You then navigate to the beckon friend option and go select the friend that you want to co-op with. The actual connecting process used to be a little wobbly, unstable, but has been mostly fixed because of the post-launch updates. Once you are connected, you can start to progress through the game without any interruptions. You don't disconnect after dying or killing a boss, and the host can even revive the summon until they run out of healing. You don't have to reconnect because of some weird magical fog gates in the world, and you can access almost all of the services in the hub zone, making the whole experience pretty seamless. Except that your progress isn't actually shared. You can level up your character, weapons, purchase items, and do various other things, but key elements like upgrading your healing or finding new weapons and spells aren't actually available to you unless you go back to your own world. This is a huge missed opportunity in my eyes, as this could have elevated the co-op experience in Lords of the Fallen far beyond what any of the other Souls-likes have to offer. This basically meant that we'd have to stop ourselves from progressing too far in any given world, since it would mean that the other player was gonna miss some cool weapons or even vital upgrades going forward, since loot in the world isn't shared. Not to mention that we basically had to finish the game twice for a full co-op playthrough, even though you could theoretically just stay in your buddy's world. This essentially felt like an upgraded version of the original Dark Souls co-op formula, while not quite being on the same level as something like the Elden Ring seamless co-op mod. Now that we know how the co-op works, I can move on to the arguably even more important topic of how playing co-op actually affects the gameplay experience, since this is the whole reason why I'm making this video to begin with.
Kann man eigentlich aus dem Elevator rausspringen?
After playing Lords of the Fallen for a few hours the first time around, I found myself thinking that it had a bunch of similar issues to Dark Souls 2. I already mentioned it a couple of times. Enemy density, and especially encounter design, just felt off and a little frustrating. Dark Souls 2, especially Scholar of the First Sin, had this issue too, but it was cranked up to 11 here in this game at launch. You would often have to fight large groups of enemies that followed the general setup of small, quick enemies mixed in with ranged, high-damaging projectiles from some mobs in the back. You then also get the occasional elite enemy that had a lot more health and damage output, which resulted in some frustrating fights where you constantly had to run around to not get overwhelmed. But all of this was only really an issue if you played solo. Co-op directly addresses this by being able to divide up the roles in your party to tackle both ranged and melee opponents at the same time. Enemies have to split their attention, so you have a lot more room to breathe, so you can actually utilize all of the tools in your build's arsenal. Which brings me to another really important point that I think you have to know about when it comes to the combat encounters in a co-op playthrough. Let me introduce you to magic and throwable items. Wait, don't click off my claymore swinging brethren. Trust me, I know. Just please bear with me here. It cannot be understated how much more fun the magic system and especially throwable items are in this game. I am someone who loves to put all his points into strength and not touch any of that stuff for most of my playthroughs, if at all. But Lords of the Fallen has managed to turn Mr. Fume Knight Ultra Greatsword guy here into a faith and throwing spear user. How the hell did this happen? I still use the biggest sword I could find. Me and my friend started off our playthrough like we would have any other Souls game. He went with a more nimble paladin type build that was able to utilize the various faith spells the game throws at you, while I completely ignored all of that and cranked that strength stat up all the way, baby. But the further we got into the playthrough, we started to get more and more useful spells and throwable items, the latter of which are a permanent upgrade in this game, by the way. Grabbing a new throwable item is basically like finding a new weapon or a spell. It just becomes a part of your arsenal, and you will get a certain amount of uses for it until you replenish the charges through these ammo pouches or resting at a vestige. The magic system also works similarly to Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring, but you are able to swap out the spells at will like you would with a weapon or armor, which makes it much more dynamic so you can adapt quicker to the enemy encounters that the game throws at you.
Alter, guck dir an, wie die gelasert wird!
Dividing up all these possible build options between two people works really well, and combined with the fact that you will get a lot of levels because you have to play through the game twice for a co-op playthrough, you and your mate should be effectively able to use most weapons and spells that the game has to offer. This whole co-op build diversity has another big implication for your playthrough, past the obvious upsides of being able to choose from a large arsenal of weaponry and, by extension, playstyles. Like I've just mentioned, dividing up roles in your party almost becomes second nature while you take on Lords of the Fallen's levels one by one. To me, it felt like we were able to enter the sort of flow state of exploration during our fairly lengthy play sessions. We could just keep playing the game for hours on end, as you usually are able to continuously move forward and not get set back too far, thanks to both the synergy of our chosen builds and how we could approach encounters, but also the theoretically uninterrupted nature of the co-op. Again, I say theoretically because we did have to occasionally go and swap worlds, so we were always more or less on the same progression in our respective saves. Going through the winding paths of the levels without having to redo them over and over through dying really helped with the novelty of some of the encounters and usage of Umbral Realm, which was another point of contention after the game's release. I didn't find it particularly annoying to have to switch between the two different world states, although I would have a few choice words for whoever decided to put these goddamn fake items that pull you into Umbral all over the place. It did make for some funny moments though.
Oh, guck mal, da liegt ein Item! Oh nein! Oh weh mir!
This whole issue was also dampened severely by the inclusion of temporary checkpoints, which you could choose to set up after getting low on healing items. The places for you to put down a vestige seedling are fairly common and spread evenly all throughout the game, so you rarely have to fear losing a lot of progress like you would in any other Souls-like. This honestly is a little bit of a double-edged sword, however. For one, I do really enjoy the tension the older Souls games bring to the table, knowing that you are low on resources and having to somehow claw your way to the next bonfire to then be showered in this overwhelming sense of relief as you see the text "bonfire lit" pop up on screen. But on the other hand, being able to continuously move forward in this flow state of exploration was also a really unique and enjoyable feeling I hadn't really experienced with any other Souls-like up to this point. I also think that this is a good place to quickly mention that I really enjoyed the actual level design up to a certain point as well. The early game was really promising, feeling somewhat close to something like Dark Souls 1's Lordran, but the longer the game went on, the more cracks started to appear. At the end, while there were some areas that weren't really all that much fun to explore, I still left with an overall pretty positive impression of the level design. But when you think of a Souls-like game, there's still one more important aspect that I've neglected to mention so far. Of course, I'm talking about the bosses. Are they epic duels which will test your skill, maybe even legendary battles that will go down in history? Or they're just pretty okay? I'm not sure if it was due to our builds being really strong or just by their design, but I don't recall dying more than just a handful of times to some early game bosses. Once we had our builds figured out, we never really ended up dying to any boss past like the midway point of the game. Even though I did just praise the game for its exploration and how we were able to go through it without any issues, I would have liked at least a little more resistance from the bosses themselves. But this is a topic that can end up being very different from player to player, based on their playstyle and weapon choices, so I'm not gonna criticize the difficulty too much here. But if the game really ends up being too easy, you can just turn to the new game modifier system I mentioned earlier. You have a bunch of options in there that could provide you with a greater challenge if you so desire. In conclusion, while this might not be everyone's cup of tea, which I completely understand if it isn't, I was able to get a fairly unique and enjoyable co-op Souls-like experience while playing through Lords of the Fallen. which is also why I'm really happy that the publisher greenlit a sequel, currently slated to release sometime in or after 2026. To be honest, I was already really surprised that this series was getting a second chance at life after the first game from 2014, but hey, here we are. I am really excited to see where they would take a direct sequel to this game. Not a complete reboot of the series this time around, but a game that actually tries to build on the good ideas of Lords of the Fallen, while also trying to fix the many issues that it had. But none of this really matters anyways, because apparently it is going to be an Epic exclusive, so no one is going to play it. That's right, Epic acquired the exclusive rights to the sequel, and I can't really understand this decision from both parties. It just doesn't make sense no matter how you look at it. Epic obviously wants to get more exclusives to incentivize people to actually use their store instead of Steam. So far so good. But then, to acquire the rights to a sequel of a game which was heavily criticized and disliked by many. I just can't see how they would think that this was the game which would make people go out of their way to leave their comfort zone. And on the other hand, you have CI Games agreeing to this exclusivity contract when they damn well know that this isn't even gonna sell a fraction of what it would if it was on Steam. Not to mention that it'll already sell worse than the first game anyways, simply because of its reputation. I guess Epic must have given them a sizable check, which may have even made this sequel a reality in the first place? I'm just speculating here, but this decision just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. If you would ask me to recommend you a good, recently released Souls-like game, it would be a pretty obvious choice. Lies of P is generally way more solid, and if you're looking for a great traditional Souls-like experience, that is the one to play. But if you want something weird, something that may have some rough edges and weird design choices, but with a fairly unique cooperative experience and some cool ideas thrown into the mix, Lords of the Fallen might be something you'd really enjoy. The game does go on sale quite frequently, up to like 60%, so if you're not sure, just wait till the holiday season and try to rope in a friend in the meantime. I hope that I was able to properly convey what made me like this game, while of course still acknowledging the fact that there are still issues, as people have rightfully pointed out over the past year. And that's where I'm gonna leave it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, I really appreciate it. As always, a big shout out to all of my lovely channel members as seen here on screen. And don't worry, Armored Core fans, I have more AC content coming in the future, which I will kind of interject into other content that I also have planned, so it's always like a nice balance of AC content and not AC content. So I hope you'll stick around for all the stuff that I've planned. But anyways, again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.